Hello everyone, and welcome to this presentation on using picture books across the curriculum in a pre-K classroom. If you don't know me, my name is Hannah Taylor. I am the Early Childhood and Intervention Consulting Teacher here in Topeka Public Schools. So, what are we going to be learning today? Well, we are learning about the value and importance of using picture books across the curriculum, not just language arts, and what that might look like so that our instruction can be more relevant, engaging, and meaningful to our students and our learners. We'll be successful when we can explain the value of picture books across the curriculum and when you can incorporate them into your lessons and not just in language arts. First, we'll talk about the value, and then we'll go over some of those steps of what it might look like to plan and execute incorporating picture books across the curriculum. Let's get started. So why should I use picture books in more than just language arts? Well, it helps students develop a stronger vocabulary, and we know that is so important to understanding concepts. It also can help students access the learning that they may not have been able to without the read aloud. Maybe the read aloud is presenting the information in a way that is more relevant and engaging to the student, or in a way that just simply makes more sense. Teachers also have the ability to do think alouds while they're reading out loud and discuss the ideas presented in the book. So it doesn't just have to be what's happening in the book, but you're able to talk about it and talk about the processes that you might use as you think through a problem or a solution. And simply, there has been research that says students perform better in math when picture books are read. So, in the study that's linked here, they talk about two prior studies that have shown success. The first one was done by Hong. In this study, the intervention was based on mathematics-related storybook reading and play with mathematical materials that were associated with the content of the book. Children who received this intervention exhibited a more positive disposition, a greater love of mathematics, and it significantly improved significantly greater performance in tasks about classification, number combination, and shapes than children who did not receive this intervention. They also talk about another study done by Young and Loveridge, and the findings of that study showed that the program was highly effective in enhancing the numeracy learning of young children immediately after the intervention. And even though later performances decreased the farther away they got from the experience, children who participated in that intervention still performed significantly better than children who did not. And then in this study was done by researchers in Austria, and they read this book that you see down in the bottom corner and just talked about math as they were reading and let the students explore the mathematical concepts. And then they gave the students tasks, math tasks, that were unrelated to the story, but were able to see how much students had grown in their math abilities. And these researchers found that a 3-month picture book reading program with picture books containing mathematics-related content had a positive effect on kindergartners' mathematics performance, and as measured by this test that you see. Moreover, these positive results were found based on picture book reading alone, without additional mathematical activities. They concluded that their study provided evidence for giving picture book reading a significant place in the kindergarten curriculum for supporting children's mathematical development. So we know through research, several research studies, that students perform better when picture books are read across the curriculum. There is also this article that is 40 children's books that foster a love of math. This was created by DREAM, which is Development and Research in Early Math Education at Stanford University. And if you open this article, it really explains the value of picture books in math specifically. And it includes book recommendations. You'll see some of them over here to the side for adding and subtracting, counting, measurement and size, patterns, algebra, shapes, spatial relations, and taking apart numbers. So you have access to this presentation. At the beginning, there was a bit.ly, which if you use that bit.ly, it will also be in the description of this YouTube video, but you can use that to open up this presentation and then access this article to get all of these recommendations. There's also sharing science through picture books. So yes, the research articles that I shared earlier were just about math, but there's also value in using picture books in science. And so this link was created by the science department at NC State University in conjunction with their School of Education. And it explains the value of picture books in science specifically. It also contains picture book recommendations to use in science with a short description of each book. And to the right, you're seeing some of those books that are on that recommendation list. And some of these you might already have access to. So we know that incorporating picture books in more than just language arts and across the curriculum provides value and helps our students' learning go deeper and farther. So how do we do it? Here are some steps for incorporating picture books. The first step is to identify the skills or the concepts that you want students to learn. What are they learning? Look at what's coming up in the CDMs. What are students going to be learning soon? And figure out what the exact skill is that they need to learn. Then look at what books will help support this skill. You can do a quick Google search, but there's also some other places you can start. One of the best places to look are the CDMs. There are read alouds listed on many of the CDMs. What books are there? They're already vetted by the curriculum and assessment teams as being appropriate for this content. And so looking there as a starting place is a great idea. But you can also look at what books are already in your classroom or what books are in your school library. If you can't find a book that meets your needs, I know we prefer to have books in our hands, but sometimes a book is such high quality that if we don't have it in our hands, we can also just find an online read aloud. YouTube has a read aloud for probably about any book that you could ever want. The thing to be careful of when you do an online read aloud is that if we just put the book on the board and hit play and don't ever interact with it, it's not going to be as valuable or meaningful to students. We have to interact with the book and model some of those thinking processes that we talked about earlier for the book to really have value. So stop the story, ask a question, and make it interactive for students. Even if you're not the one holding the book and reading it aloud, it can still have value. But you can't just put it up there and hit play. It'll lose its value then. So you identify a book that will support the skill. And then you have to figure out, how am I going to use this book? Am I going to use it as an anticipatory set just to get their attention and ignite their learning and excitement about this skill or concept? Will I use it to build background knowledge? Maybe we're about to learn something that I know is tricky for students. It's difficult, it's complex, and so if I give them background knowledge, it might help them be successful. So maybe I'll use it to build that background knowledge. will it be used to practice a skill? Maybe you've been working on counting and they just need more practice. Well, there are plenty of counting books out there, or books where you can bring in counting. And so you're counting throughout the book, practicing over and over again, counting and one-to-one correspondence. Maybe it will be a launch for a bigger project or activity. Maybe you want to do a project about maps and mapping your community or your home or your classroom. And so there are books, and I'll talk more about specific books later, but there are books even listed on the CDMs that can help launch this project and give them a starting point for what it is going to look like at the end, or get them excited about this project and get their brains really just thinking about what this could look like. Or maybe you're at the end of a unit or a topic and you want to review a skill and wrap it up. Maybe you're going to use the book that way. So now that we know the main steps for incorporating a book across the curriculum, let's practice. So let's start with step 1. Identify the skills or concepts you want students to learn. So I went through this process, and I'm going to show you the process that I went through to give you context and an example of what this might look like. So I looked at what is coming up on the CDMs. What are students going to be learning? And I noticed in math, in Module 4, which remember is Eureka Math Module 5, we're going to be talking about equals in the context of addition and subtraction. And I know that equals is kind of tricky and complex for students. It's really can be abstract. So I know that is going to be challenging for my students. I also know that after we talk about that, we're also going to be talking in Module 5, which is Eureka Math Module 4, we're going to be comparing weight and numbers. And we need to know the concept of equals there too, to know when weight is equal. But then I also looked at the science CDMs to see what are we going to be learning in science. And in the physical science unit, we're learning about forces such as pushing and pulling. And I know that the forces are going to react differently when there's different weights or different numbers. And so the concept of equals can come into play here too. And so I know all of these things go together. I know that it is very abstract and tricky for students, or it can be. And so I know that's what my students need to learn. So what books are going to help support this skill? Well, first, I'm going to look at the CDMs. Are there any books already on the CDMs that might help? And so that's exactly what I did. This is directly what just popped up from the Unit 2 Science CDM. Notice in the resources section, there's read alouds. And so I was looking through all of these read alouds and one really caught my eye. And that was Equal Schmeequal by Virginia Kroll. I saw this title and I Googled just the cover of the book and saw this cover and was like, I wonder, I see that it has the balance, and so it's talking about equals. It has equal in the title. I wonder what this book is about. And so I went to YouTube because I didn't have a paper copy of the book, and I found the book. So before you move on, it is going to make so much more sense to you when we get to step 3 if you have read this book or listened to this book. So if you have not, either if you have it, go read it, or you can use this QR code or this YouTube link. Just type it in on your browser and you'll be able to watch the same read aloud that I did. Or you can just search it on YouTube, just Equal Schmeequal by Virginia Kroll. So take a second and go listen to this story. All right, now that you've heard the story, let's move on to step 3. Step 3 will make a lot more sense knowing what the story is about. So step 3 is determining, how am I going to use this book? So as I listened to this book, I thought it did an excellent job of giving a visual and just a storybook connection and context for what equals means. And I know, like I said earlier, that equals can be an abstract and tricky concept for our young students. And so I thought, this would be really great as an anticipatory set. So maybe I'm going to read this book before we ever even talk about the word equals. I'm going to get them excited about what equals means and to explore it. And I'm also going to be building their background knowledge so that when we talk about equals, it's going to make a little bit more sense. They have something to connect it to. And I'm thinking specifically of these pages in the book. Yes, this is with weight, but think about how equals in addition and subtraction is even more abstract than with weight. And so if we read this book or something similar before we ever use the word equals, how much better could our students do being able to connect it right back to this page of how equal doesn't always mean that it's going to look the same on both sides, but it's going to have the same quantity or value or weight. And this is just a really great graphic depiction of that concept. And students are going to be interested, they're going to be engaged, and they're going to remember this. Especially, make a copy of this page, especially the one where it's balanced and where it is equal. And put this on an anchor chart as you talk about equals. So you can remind them, hey, remember when we read that book, Equal Schmeequal? That was equal. And so you're giving them a place to build off of and just giving them greater background knowledge so that all students can be successful and have greater access to this curriculum. So, now that I have shown you an example of how I went through the 3 steps, now it is your turn. So I would love for you to pause this video and use the 3 steps to make a plan for what picture book you will incorporate into an upcoming lesson. So remember, step 1, you're going to identify what you want students to learn. Look at what's coming up in the CDMs. What are you going to be teaching soon that you want students to learn, especially things that might be tricky or complex for students? Then, once you know what you want them to learn, look at what books will help support this skill. Look at the CDMs. Look at what's already in your classroom or your school library. Do a Google search and find a book that will support this skill. Then, once you've chosen the book, determine how are you going to use it? How would it best strengthen students' understanding of the concept? As practice, as background knowledge, as a launch to a project? How will students learn the most and gain the most from this book? As you do this, remember, you have to be intentional. You have to not just read a book to read a book, but you have to choose your book carefully. Not every concept or skill needs a read aloud. Can it have one? Yes, but we need to be intentional about what book we are using and when. So that means we have to plan ahead and read through the book fully. If I didn't read through that Equal Schmeequal book before I determined how I was going to use it, or even if I was going to use it, then my students are not going to be getting the most out of that book. I need to read through the entire book and even determine if it's appropriate for my students or for the skill. Maybe I need to choose a different book. So I have to read the book fully, and I have to plan ahead of what questions will I ask? Where will I stop? Where will I have students think? Maybe I won't even read the whole book the first time. Maybe I'm going to stop and let students think or explore or experiment on their own. And then maybe I'll come back to the book another day. But I have to plan ahead and be intentional. And finally, remember, you know your students. You know what interests them and what is going to get them excited about learning. So think about those things as you're choosing a book. If you have 2 books that look like they're going to be great to help you teach the skill and support the skill, and you're not sure which one to use, well, is one going to be more interesting to your students than the other? That can help you determine what book you are going to use. This process might look like these light bulbs. The first time you do it, it might be really tangled, really messy, really tricky. But the more you do it, the less tangled and messy it's going to be until it is just second nature and you're just doing it without even having to think about it. You're still intentional, but it just comes to you. So I want you to pause, use these 3 steps, and plan. What is this going to look like? What picture book am I going to incorporate? And what lesson and skill am I going to be incorporating it for? All right, now you've had a chance to practice this process on your own of how you're going to incorporate a picture book into the curriculum, not just language arts. I cannot wait to see all of the amazing ideas that you came up with. If you want to email me what you came up with, I would be happy to listen and hear about it or come watch. But before we finish, let's talk about some other learning and resources that might be helpful as you continue to be intentional about incorporating these picture books. First, this website. Again, remember this presentation is linked in the description so you can access this website. It contains ELA and math activities for the book, The Doorbell Rang. If you've never read this book before, it's a cute story about how they made cookies and then the doorbell keeps ringing and ringing and ringing, and every time it rings, everybody is getting less and less cookies. Originally, they were going to get a lot, and then by the end, they only get 1. The activities that are listed on this website say they're for K1 or K2, but they can be easily adapted down to pre-K. And honestly, the kinder might be appropriate for some pre-K classrooms and students. You know your students and what they're capable of. But this is just an example of how you can use this book across curriculums and support both ELA and math. And then I went through the CDMs to find other books that I thought might be helpful in upcoming units. So the book Map My Room is from ELA Unit 3. And think about how this book could be used in math for shapes, positional words. I put it beside, above, next to, between. They also make a list in this book, so you could practice making lists and counting how many. Or maybe you say, oh, I want to make a list of 5, and you're making your list and you've only got 2. How many more do I need to make my list of 5? And so you could practice how many more. There's also the book But I Want It from the Unit 5 of ELA. And this book would be great for counting, addition, and subtraction. You could turn this into a unit about the store, the grocery store, or the restaurant, and talking about how I want it, but maybe they don't have enough. And so you can connect it to their own needs and wants. Give them fake money or fake pieces of paper that represent money, and have them determine what they can and cannot buy based on their needs and wants. And then there's also the book, A Chair for My Mother, which is also from Unit 5 of ELA. And this is great for the same reasons as But I Want It. And you can do some of the same things with it. You can also talk about saving up and adding more. And how many do I have now? And so these books are just a few examples of books you should already have in your classroom that you could use. You're using them in ELA. How can you extend them into the math curriculum as well? As you go through this process, if you have questions or you want help, you want me to come watch, I would be more than happy to do that. Just send me an email. You see it on the screen, and I am happy to help in any way that I can. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and feel more prepared for incorporating books, picture books, across the curriculum, not just in language arts, and you understand the value and how much it can really extend and enrich students' learning. Thank you for coming.